What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. We'd also like to give a special shout out to one of Not Your Average Meta's generous patrons, Martin Stanley, for everything he's done to help out the channel. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we have another fun game we filmed down at the Hobby Horse in Taylorville, Illinois. This week's matchup features Martin borrowing Fog's Treebeard Gracious Host deck, Patrick returning playing the original NYAM gambler Mayael the Anima, Foggirl playing his favorite deck Marath Will of the Wild, and Foil back again playing his gift-giving imp Blim Comedic Genius. Now that we're fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Martin plays a Plains, then pays 1 to cast the Paladin class. Patrick plays a tapped Path of Ancestry where Fog plays a Plains of his own and Foil plays a Swamp. Martin plays a Forest for turn and then pays 2 to cast an Assault Formation before he passes his turn to Patrick, who plays a Carplusian Forest. Patrick then uses his Path of Ancestry to help cast an Elvish Mystic, which has him scrying 1 card, which he puts to the bottom of his library. Fog plays a Forest for turn and then pays 2 to cast a Rampant Growth, which he then uses to go get another Plains to put into play tap from his library. Foil plays a Scalding Tarn for turn before he then pays the 1 life to crack it, going to get a Sulphurous Mire from his library to put into play tapped. Martin plays another Plains for turn before he then pays 3 to cast of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, which enters play and creates him a food token. Patrick plays a Plains for turn and then taps out in order to cast his commander Mayael the Anima, which has him scrying 1 card, keeping it on top of his library. Patrick then goes to combat, swinging his Elvish Mystic over at Fog for 2 damage. Fog plays a Mountain for turn and then also pays 3 in order to cast his commander Marath Will of the Wild, who enters play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Foil plays a tapped Temple of Malice for turn, which has him scrying 1 card to the bottom of his library. On his upkeep, Martin creates another food token and plays another Plains for turn. He then taps out and casts his commander Treebeard, which creates him 2 more food tokens. Patrick plays a Pillaverge Pathway for turn and passes. Fog plays another Forest for turn before paying 4 to cast a Ripjaw Raptor, passing his turn to Foil. Foil plays a Mountain for turn and then pays 4 to cast his commander Blim, Comedic Genius. On Martin's turn, his Saga goes off, which has him creating 4 soldier tokens. Martin then goes to combat, swinging Treebeard over at Foil for 5 commander damage. And in his second main phase, he casts a Druid class, passing his turn to Patrick. Patrick plays a Mountain for turn before he then taps out in order to use his commander's ability to look at the top 5 cards of his library, which has him putting into play a Quartzwood Crasher. And on his end step, Fog pays to ping his Ripjaw Raptor 1 time, which has him drawing a card. Fog then draws on his upkeep and plays a Forest for turn before paying 3 to cast a Takasia's Welcome. He then also casts an Evolutionary Leap and then passes. Foil plays another Mountain for turn before paying 4 in order to cast a Demonic Pact. On his end step, Martin pays to crack a food token, which has him gaining 3 life and putting 4 +1/+1 counters on his commander. Martin then draws for turn and then pays to cast a ram through targeting his commander as well as Foil's commander. This then has Foil's commander getting sent to the graveyard while Foil takes 1 damage. Martin then pays to crack another food, which has him gaining more life and putting more counters onto his commander. He then decides to go to combat and this time swings his commander over at Patrick, who just takes the 13 commander damage. Patrick plays a tapped Jetmir's Garden for turn before then once again pays in order to activate his commander's ability. He then looks at the top 5 cards of his library, which has him put into play Vorinclex Monstrous Raider. Patrick then bottoms the rest of the cards he looked at before going to combat, swinging both of his creatures over at Martin. Martin decides to just take all the damage, which has Patrick creating a Beast token. On his end step, Fog pays to create an Elemental token, which has him drawing a card off of his enchantment. Fog then draws for turn and plays another Forest before he then pays to sack his Elemental token to his Evolutionary Leap. This then has him revealing cards from the top of his library until he hits a Feldon, which he then puts into his hand. Fog then pays to remove the last counter off his commander, which creates him another Elemental token and triggers his enchantment, once again having him draw a card. He then pays to cast Druid of the Anima as well as paying to cast the Feldon that he revealed earlier. On his upkeep, Foil chooses to draw 2 additional cards before he then draws for turn and plays a Command Tower. He then pays 4 to cast Karn the Betrayer and passes his turn. Martin draws for turn before he then pays to crack another food token, gaining more life and putting more counters onto his commander. Martin then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Patrick, who blocks with his token, but in response, Martin casts Soul's Grace, which has him gaining a bunch of life and adding more counters to his commander, which gives him enough power to kill Patrick with his commander damage. Fog plays a Plains for turn before he then pays to recast his commander a second time, which has him entering play with 5 1/1 counters on him. Fog then pays to sack his elemental token to the Evolutionary Leap, which has him revealing cards from the top of his library until he hits a Soulscar Mage. He then puts the mage into his hand and passes the turn to Foil. On his upkeep, Foil chooses to have Martin discard 2 cards before he then draws for turn. Foil then plays a Mountain for turn before going to combat, swinging Karn over at Martin, who just doesn't block and takes 5 damage. Second main phase, Foil casts a Blasphemous Act in order to wipe the board. In response to this, Fog pays to sack his Feldon to the Evolutionary Leap, which has him revealing cards till he hits a Welcoming Vampire. He then pays an additional mana to ping the Ripjaw Raptor to draw a card, before using his Druid of the Anima to create another elemental token, which has him drawing a card off the Takasia's Welcome. The board then gets wiped and Fog draws a card off his Ripjaw Raptor, taking damage, while Foil gets to draw cards off Karn, leaving his possession. Finally, Foil pays to recast his commander and passes. Martin draws for turn and then casts Late for Dinner, which has him targeting the Rosy Cotton of Southland in his graveyard, which has her coming back into play, creating a multiple food tokens when she enters. He then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Foil, who blocks with Blim but still ends up dying to commander damage. Fog draws, but he knows he's dead to Martin on his next turn, so he just decides to concede the game to Martin. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.